One. Jim Joyce, I missed you.
Yeah, it's been a while. Where do we find you?
We're in LA, obviously visiting Adina, but taking advantage of being on the West Coast with time zone difference and quite a lot of back to back around here. Lots of stuff going on here too, which is good.
Is there
No, just getting to know the health tech scene, met with a bunch of people every day, just tons of meetings, but enjoying. And in Adina's building here now, I actually found a podcast room, believe it or not. This is pretty epic stuff here. I feel like we're professionals. We're not. And yourself, beautiful background there.
This is my local pub, the Hilton. When you come to Dublin, we'll go over there. That's the local. It was a nice day.
I know. I've been promising with Marina and I to head over there one of these days when it gets a little more warmer.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm pushing.
Also, it's so weird to do this my morning, right? Because typically for you, you're back in Dublin, right? So it's evening, but so it's going to be interesting. But anyway, here we are. We have our next guest waiting in the waiting room. So let me let Innes in. Looking forward to meeting Innes. I've never met Innes.
I'll give it. So Innes is a world famous golfer, right? Innes, we're going to start off there. But we have
what a way to start.
We have a mutual friend from New Jersey, Jeff, me, that we've known for lots of years. And then we've made a habit of getting together at the JP Morgan conference for the last couple of years. And he's in a really exciting space that near and dear to my heart. Innes, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, guys. Nice to see you both.
And do you know Eugene?
I don't know that
we haven't met. Even though I grew up in New Jersey, so in Wayne, New Jersey.
I did not bite my accent.
Okay.
Not a kind of northern New Jersey accent.
Could not tell at all.
They're in West, in Morristown. Been here for about 15 years, but obviously from Scotland and never lost the accent.
Listen, this kind of accent is prevalent in New Jersey as well. So in different parts of it, I'm sure. But Jim said, welcome, and to our millions of listeners and viewers, tell us who Innes is.
So
go all the way back.
I was born in Scotland. An interesting story. I've got a Swedish mother and a Scottish father who met in Washington, D.C. in the 60s. I got married in the Church of the Presidents, and I'm not quite sure how that happened because they didn't have any money. But my mum was pregnant with me and they moved back, emigrated back to Scotland. So I was born in Scotland, but I tell everybody I was made in America and I just came. So grew up in a small town called Kirkcaldy, which is on the east coast of Scotland, 20 miles south of St Andrews, for reference, to the golf. And it was famous for two things. One was being the home of linoleum. So the floor covering. No, and there's a funny Billy Connolly joke goes with that. I'm not going to go there today though, because this is a kind of polite audience. But the other thing was Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is what modern economic theory is based on. He was actually born in Kirkcaldy. So there's Adam Smith Centre. So spent a lot of time growing up there, moved around a little bit.
Could you send a copy of that, of one of Adam's books, over to where your parents met, DC?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I'm not sure what's going on, right? It's a bit, I'm not sure anything about theories being its way there. But yeah, so I grew up there. My dad worked in the oil industry. So we actually lived in New Orleans for a year when I was 9 years old, and then lived in the Netherlands, in The Hague, for a year as well. And went through school, not very successfully. I flunked out of high school. It was just probably partying a little bit too much, having a good time. And that was on the east coast of Scotland. And then came out to the States, interestingly, for a summer to teach soccer. I used to be a big soccer player, still follow the game. In Kentucky, of all places, had a great time there.
I'm kidding. We've had on the podcast, we've had a Kentucky soccer player from Ireland.
There was actually, when I was over, there was a couple of Irish guys there as well. So it's obvious. Yeah.
That's funny. There's a guy, Dave Griffiths. Remember Dave Griffiths that came on? He got a scholar, packing in, staying there.
Wow. Probably wasn't as good as him because I never got a scholar. But I had a very fun summer. And let me think. So my parents are still both back there. I got one brother. He's an interesting guy. He now leads an investigations unit into child sex trafficking in Cambodia. He's the advisor to the government on that, works with Interpol, FBI, everything. So he's a kind of heavy-duty version of the family.
Wow.
Yeah, and then, as I say, didn't do great at high school, but I ended up working in a bank. And this was just when the computers were coming in, so it shows you how old I am. And didn't enjoy that, and really talked my way onto a local community college, an engineering course. And I'd failed math at high school, so this was a bit of a leap. But I ended up doing fairly well on that. I went on to university in Strathclyde and got an undergrad in electrical and electronic engineering, and worked in the tech industry for probably 10 years. Straight out of school, went to work for Nortel Networks down in Maidenhead near London on wireless telecommunications, so a lot of cellular-based stuff, which was super interesting. And then moved back up to Scotland to work for Hewlett-Packard, which then split. So Hewlett-Packard became Agilent Technologies Diagnostics. So led a team that developed a solution to monitor the quality of service that people who are roaming in different countries were getting. And if you've ever traveled abroad and you get those SMS welcomes in Europe, you're welcome.
You're responsible for that?
I was part of the team that led the development of it. There was a lot of people involved, so not really just on me. And I was only managing, so the real work was...
I do like to know how much I'm going to get charged as soon as I land somewhere.
And it actually had big uptake, so I was quite successful. And then decided, and let me just talk about my own family quickly before I go there. So married to Jane for 28 years this year. She's from Kirkcaldy as well. And we've got two great kids. Our daughter, Annika, just graduated from GW, double major in criminal justice psychology. Is looking to go on to do a doctorate in forensic psychology. So clearly gets the brains from her mom. And our son, Cormac, just on the golf theme, Jim, he's out currently in California at Chapman, where he is, in theory, studying business and playing golf, and that, hopefully in that order. But he's not a golfer, actually.
Okay.
And it's just curious, because I get asked a question like that all the time. What do you consider yourself, right? Like, to your point, you were made in America, but now countries. Like, what do you consider yourself?
I'm a bit conflicted, to be honest, because I'm a very proud Scot, and I'm probably more patriotic since I don't live there now than I ever was when I was there, I think. So kind of absence makes the heart grow fonder. But I'm also an American citizen, so myself and Jane became American citizens, and I'm very proud to be an American citizen. I know that there's this country is at odds with itself, and even internationally, currently with the current government that's in. But I keep saying to people through the whole time I was working, even abroad, traveling to America and now living here, I said, every country has its issues, but
Absolutely.
no other country I'd rather raise my family in. I love this country. I think it's got so many great things about it. Yeah, it has its challenges, but show me a country that doesn't exist.
And it's so interesting, the question, Eugene, like you say, look at Eugene's in California visiting his daughter, right, who grew up between
pretty much all across Europe, right? Like,
yeah. My son grew up in Ireland, and he's going off to medical school in Italy, and from an American dad and Italian. So it's like these people, like the whole idea, this like simple, what are you? Doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I'm thinking. Yeah, if anything, I'm probably a global citizen. If you look at our family, actually, my parents back in Scotland, brothers in Cambodia, Jane's only family's in Sydney, Australia. So we're a bit of the definition of a global family. And I think the world's a small place.
Right.
Philosophically, I think people are people. I think there's, and inherently, people are good. I think sometimes we maybe struggle to see that with the news and everything. But I've met great people everywhere I've been in the world.
Yep. Absolutely. And the news only focuses on the negatives and, all the things. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So then I Nortel, Agilent and stuff. And then the tech bubble, early 2000s, was starting to burst a little bit. And I volunteered to take a redundancy payment and step out and do something else. I expected to stay in tech. And through a weird series of circumstances, got offered a job with Novartis in Basel. And when I was approached about this, somebody said, "You ever thought about Pharma?" I'm like, "No." I said, "Who's the company?" They said, "Novartis." I said, "Never heard of them." I literally I knew nothing about the industry. And they're like, "Would you like to come over for an interview?" And I'd never been to Switzerland. So I'm like, "Yeah, what the hell, right?" And it was an Australian lady they were looking to bring in marketers from different industries. Pharma's a very conservative industry, so really to challenge conventional thinking. And they had a CEO at the time, Thomas Eberling, who had come from Pepsi, consumer goods. He found the power of marketing. So went over for an interview, really didn't have any expectations about getting the job. And I think
Right.
sometimes when you go into an interview like that, you're pretty relaxed. And at the end of it, after a 1 hour in,
You just wanted to see Switzerland. Why not?
yeah, at the end of the interview, they're like, "So do you want a job?" And I'm like, "Really?" And
Yeah.
I invited myself and Jane, and we talked about it before this came up. I said, "Sure. So what's the worst that can happen?" I'm a big believer in your life. There are opportunities that are made available to you. And I think I've always tried to lean in. A lot of people, I think, look at my career and why the hell did you do this or that? And I think it's just something I always think you've got an opportunity to learn. And if it doesn't work out, you learn something, you move on.
Epic.
Love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's, so just complete that. The Novartis, 4 years global marketing, and then came out to the US on a kind of leadership fast track program. Was a sales rep in California. We were based in San Rafael in Marin County, and I was selling or promoting a biologic to treat severe allergic asthma, a really cool drug called Xolair. And I had a sales territory from Redwood City, south of San Francisco, to Crescent City on the Oregon border. Arguably, it's beautiful sales territory because you had Napa, Sonoma, everything. It's fantastic. Did that for a year, went up to Oregon as part of this program and led a sales team that covered Oregon and Southern Washington, which was great. And then was supposed to go back to Basel, but got offered the job in the US organization in East Hanover, very close to Morristown, hence how we came here. And they went in-house there and did a whole bunch of different roles. The most recent one, when I left in 2014, I was running neuropsychiatry business there, which was great. Decided to go work for a smaller company called Arexo in the addiction medicine space. And one of the things I tend to have gravitated towards in my career is more on the mental health, neuroscience area. I think it's fascinating. It's arguably the last great frontier of science and medicine. The brain's so complex, we don't really understand it. So very interesting. They ran most of their commercial stuff, and then was recruited into Otsuka, a great Japanese company, back in 2017 to run their central nervous system business. Did that for 3 years, and then was promoted to chief commercial officer, which I did for another 3 years. Had a great run there. I really enjoyed it. Left there probably 2.5 years ago now and went to be a CEO in a biotech, a clinical stage biotech, trying to develop a psychedelic to treat demoralization syndrome and cancer. And the timing wasn't great because it was the biotech winter. The whole psychedelics, there's a lot of question marks about IP protection and also how to commercialize, because it's a very different model. So unfortunately, wasn't able to raise funds. And then I was approached by AdhereTech, which is a privately held company. The chair of the board had heard that I had pharma experience. I also had tech experience, which in my experience is relatively unique. And I always felt medicine has such promise, but especially in this country, it's very fragmented, the delivery of that. And I think if tech is appropriately applied to the right problem, can have huge gains for patients. And so that's why I came in here. Adherence, as Jim knows, it's a tough nut to crack, but it's arguably the 800-pound gorilla in healthcare's room, because people are developing all these great meds, but if patients don't take them, you're not going to get the benefits. So that's really what brought me in here as well.
It's clinically proven that it can be more effective if you take it.
Go figure.
It's interesting, and we'll get to there's so many levels of that onion that we want to peel on medication adherence and human behavior, but I do want to go back to the pharma.
Right.
I think all three of us here have spent some time in pharma. I always joke around, I lost most of my hair in that period of time. But given you were in a commercial role, marketing role, what I found in pharma, and I'm just curious on your thoughts, companies centralize, then they distribute the budgets, centralize and distribute the budgets. It's a pendulum swinging one way or the other. What have you found in the commercial roles that helped you, work for you, and what are the sort of gotchas for any entrepreneurs that are selling into pharma to think through?
So I think the pharma, by and large, are big hulking bureaucracies. And they need to be, because there's still a thing.
Regulated market. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that one of the areas that I always felt was downplayed, and people in AHQ tend to look down a little bit on the sales folks. Sales in some parts of society has a negative connotation. People think of used car salesmen and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's about relationships. And they talk about the last 3 feet. Because I was asked at various points during my career within pharma, how can we get rid of the sales reps? How can we do this with technology? And I said, look, you can maybe enhance it, but you'll never be able to get rid of them because people buy from people. And it's all about those relationships that the sales reps develop. So I made a very big focus on connecting with the sales reps and the sales leadership in general, but making sure that they had what they need to be successful, and also that they were supported and then recognized when they were successful, the value that they bring. I think the other thing, the great thing about a big company like a Novartis or Otsuka or whatever, you have a lot of inherent structure within there, which is not necessarily the case in smaller companies. So if you're able to understand how the levers work within that, and you yourself can then be quite efficient at making sure that things work by leveraging that inherent structure which is in there. I think the other thing I prided myself on was really being able to connect with people. I'm a big believer that the heart of leadership is authenticity. And with leadership, you want people to follow you, but you want them to do it willingly. In order to follow you, people need to trust you. In order to trust you, you're being authentic with them. And I think that the Scots and the Irish, I think a core part of the culture is we're pretty direct. You just tell people, hopefully in a nice way, but you tell them what you're thinking. Not everybody always likes it, but I find that really, and I think that one of the challenges within corporate world, I don't think this is unique to pharma, is that you have a lot of people with very high IQ, a lot of qualifications, and they tend to lead with their head. But the thing is, I think that you need to connect with people in the heart, and it's how you make people feel. So one of the things that myself and I had a great team supporting me, we focus very much on employee engagement and connecting from a leadership all the way through with folks. And we were able to deliver some great results because we had 88% people engagement. That's across, including Salesforce. The average in pharma was low 60s. And I think we delivered great results because I think it was Peter Drucker that said culture is strategy for breakfast. Completely buy that because you've got to connect here before you go there. So I've always tried to be very open with people, maybe to the point of maybe sometimes being too transparent, but to let them know why you're asking them to do something and what's going on with the company. And I think that generates engagement and buy-in. And as a result of that, especially with leading commercial people, I think the commercial people, especially salespeople, are inherently usually extroverts. I'm a pretty extroverted person, so I was able to leverage my own personality, I think, to connect with people. Now, and I think that as a leader, you get to set the tone for a culture. It's part of the privilege of leadership. And how you come into that. So I would go on stage dressed as William Wallace. I'd be on stage singing William Swords, everything like that. So it was.
I wish we had time for you to go change and do a little solo.
No, you probably don't.
So set the stage for us. You're coming off a stage as dressed as William Wallace, and you get this opportunity now. So when I think about AdhereTech, I've known about AdhereTech forever. They've been around.
I used to, back in the day when I used to live in New York and Jersey area, we had a Health 2.0 meetup, and Josh, I can't remember his name, Josh Stein, right, was the founder, and I think he presented there. So that was 15.
Right.
Yeah, so it's almost. Oh yeah, I think the company was founded in 2011, started to commercialize in 2016.
Yeah. When just like even listening to you've been some of the edges, you're this polished pharmaceutical executive, you're running these big teams, you get this big organization. Maybe take us in and you accept the opportunity. What'd you find? How'd you unpack it? What was that like?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an eye-opener, to be honest. I think so. The interesting thing is that the AdhereTech has very good tech. It's very low patient burden. They actually had great data, but they didn't really know how good the data was that they had. And I think
maybe just for anyone listening, what is the tech?
All right, so the tech, this is an example. I don't know if you can see it here. So basically, patients, there's been a lot of adherence solutions that have come and gone, and there's a bit of apathy in the industry because people are like, I don't think it can be solved because it's really a human condition issue. So whatever you do, you've got to make it as easy as possible for patients to adopt it. Patients are used to taking pills from a pill bottle. So what AdhereTech developed is smart pill devices that work on cellular technology. No apps, no phone required. And because of that, and the reminder systems and behavioral reinforcement, everything built in there. But basically, it's simple as patients take the pills from a pill bottle, and this monitors this and reminds them without them having to do anything else. And over time, what we've been able to show is that we change behaviors. We keep patients on drug longer, but also they start to take their meds closer and closer to the desired windows in which the drug was studied. And the reason behind that was really because of the simplicity from a patient perspective. But to go back to what else I found, so I think one of the challenges that, and the reason that the board had approached me is that there was very little experience of pharma within AdhereTech. Now, if you're selling into pharma, it's an interesting industry, very complex, a lot of intricacies. So that's ultimately why they brought me in. The company had been good tech, but just struggling to commercialize. And really that's why I was brought in. And there was a bunch of things that had to be redone, unwound, change people, bring in new people, that type of thing, which was unfortunate, but it was necessary. And I think really just reposition the company. I think one of the big challenges, and I'll be honest, the mistake I made was that because it's a smaller organization, I didn't think we needed as much structure, or really very much structure at all. And that was a miss on my part early doors, where I recognized belatedly through feedback from my own leadership team that we needed to put in more structure. Even though it's a small company, people still need to know how to work together, etc. And I think once we did that, we're really starting to gain a lot of traction, which is awesome. But that would be a learning for me next time.
Do you mind me asking how many people? Because I'm always fascinated on the size of the companies and where, from a culture perspective, and
yeah. So we have 21 people. We have various contractors and things for us. So just to put in a little bit of context, most of our people are on the tech side because it's a hardware solution. There's software platform, etc. There's also firmware to connect the two. Each of those is pretty specialized areas. So that's where the majority of the team is. And we've been very fortunate. We've got some extremely talented people on there that have been willing to stick it out through the tough times and everything as well. And that's been a key focus, is the people engagement. So we've had zero regrettable losses since I've come in, which I think has been absolutely critical to being able to stabilize the company and establish that foundation for growth, which we're now seeing.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and you think about your own company, Eugene, but people think of entrepreneurship. I always think that someone once told me it's institution building, and which is contradiction, right? Because you come into something that has no structure, no institutional capabilities, and you start conceiving of it. But the first thing you do but you're building a new type of institution, one that has different respect for different systems and timings and things. And I was thinking about, like, how do you create that cadence evaluation? People, it's just going to walk in every day and what you have to do is just going to jump into people's heads. It doesn't happen that way.
But I think every institution has its own DNA. And I think that DNA has impacts by, I don't know, I'm going to geek out here. If a new leader joins, it's like you CRISPR a new DNA, and that needs to permeate, right? And some will be rejected, almost like some will maintain within that DNA strand, right? I don't know. But
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I think that's one of the differences. So pharma, very regulated, a lot of data, incredibly data rich in the way that things, and very structured in how it was run. Tech is different. I knew that from previous time in tech. To your point, it still needs some level of structure, but how you lead, I think, is different. So I was much more, I'd say, hard charging in pharma because that's the DNA, that's the expectation, especially on the commercial side. You came in here, the company had been struggling. So obviously you're worried about, are people going to hang around or not? So I had to come in much more softly, I think, and demonstrate a lot more patience than we had to do to understand the company, get to know the people, what makes them tick. Engineers are different from salespeople fundamentally. There's a big difference there.
Sure.
That's one of the opportunities and challenges, is being able to flex your leadership between sales, highly technical people as well. But it's been a fun ride. It certainly stretched me. I've learned a lot from it.
Okay.
Given your pharma background, sorry, Jim.
You go.
Given your pharma background, and I just did a quick search, pharma leaves on the table just in the US alone, something like $200 to $300 billion because of non-adherence. And this is not to mention poor outcomes if you don't stick to the regimen. Part of that, there's oral solubles, et cetera. So how do you look at this market for AdhereTech? Because you have a device, right? I know Jim had an injectable collection. There's so many apps out there to track adherence, right? The market is just all over the place a bit.
Yeah, I think that it is because nobody's really solved it. I think that people have come and made a run at it. There was a lot of hype around the apps when apps first started getting developed, and everybody has an app. Unfortunately, patients don't associate taking their med with their phone. So I've got 200 apps on my phone, and I probably use 3 of them. So I think that was part of the challenge. I think it's very fragmented. There is no real leader within the market. That's what we're aspiring to do. I think we actually, if you look at the market, there's the injectables, which obviously Jim with Health Beacon, that was an area you guys were very strong in. What we've got is we got 2 devices. So we got the cap, which fits over existing bottle caps, so you don't need to redo stability. Then we have a bottle, and the other part of the market is blister packs, which we're looking into as well. In terms of the way that pharma operates, so I think there's 2 aspects. There's the clinical trial market, and then there's the commercial. So let me start with the clinical trials. Clinical trials right now, the gold standard, such as it is pill counts and e-diaries. And there's lots of data out there that these are hugely inaccurate. Now, obviously, if a patient's not taking the med as they're supposed to in the study, that increases the likelihood of a failed study. And there's a lot of investment going into that. Because there's never really been a dominant, successful player in this, everybody's reverted to, I use pill counts and I use e-diary. And everybody like, no, there is nothing else. So that's what we're trying to change. We can be much more accurate. On the clinical trial side, on the commercial side, pharma is very wedded to patient acquisition. And the example I'll give, just look at your TV screen. The amount that's spent on DTC TV ads every year runs into billions and billions of dollars. And it's all about pouring into the funnel. There's I wouldn't say none, but significantly less on keeping patients on drug. So what you've seen in the last 10 years, the higher price specialty meds, pharma are creating these patient support service groups. And so they call it white glove service. So if somebody's coming on, you ease it. The challenge with that is that they still don't know when a patient's taking the drug or when they're not. And it's really intervention about the timeliness of that's absolutely critical. The nice thing we do, we track it in real time down to the second. The industry is changing though, and just referencing back to the Republican Party in power. So RFK is creating chaos at the FDA at the moment. But one of the things he did is he's gone on record as saying that he does not support, is not a fan of directly advertising.
We've seen that.
But really, the US is the only major country that does that. So one of the things he's done is...
Which is brilliant. I never understood.
Drives the reason that pharma does it.
I know why pharma does it. I just, from even a consumer perspective, I get it. It builds the brand, but am I really going to walk in and for my XYZ disease, ask for a particular drug?
Yes, the answer is yes. That's why...
It has to, right? Yeah.
Has to. And in 7 out of 10, because there's a lot of research done on this. I used to run a brand that was spending hundreds of millions a year on this. And patients will go in, and there's a lot of calls to action in the DTC. But in 7 out of 10 cases, if a patient asks a physician to prescribe something for them, they will do it. Because it's part of, you need the patient to work with you if you're going to effectively treat them. So that does it. It drives huge upside. Otherwise, pharma wouldn't do it. They're very smart business people. Now, because RFK has taken a run at this, that's a huge lever that pharma potentially won't have available to it to drive patient acquisition, depending on how this plays out. So I actually predict that as you go forward, investors still expect pharma to deliver the same margins, everything like that. You're going to have to start focusing more on
retention and adherence.
Get onto a branded drug because the payers have put a lot of barriers in. But once they're there, it's going to become, I believe, more important to keep a patient on drug longer because that's going to be one of the few levers you have. So I do think that the importance of adherence in the commercial setting is going to become increasingly a priority over the coming years.
I think also, I always felt that it was an ownership issue. And it wasn't just pharma is just a reflection of the medical system in a lot of ways, that it's an ownership system that the doctor diagnoses and prescribes, but their job is not to have you take the medication, follow you to the house. And then you have a pharmacist who probably should, you have a nurse who might support you in the technique and what to do and be more supportive in their nature. Then you go to the pharmacy. And then really what's happened in the US is that the pharmacist doesn't necessarily have that intimate relationship that would happen at one stage. So in the historical context, it would have been the pharmacist that would have owned adherence in that way, saying, hey, why isn't Eugene or Jim stopped in to get their medications? Let me give them a call. But that kind of colloquial small town pharmacy system just doesn't exist. And then to your point, pharma just mirrors the medical system and creates ownership, like what you ran those teams over the doctors. So they don't own necessarily that system, and it's such a big hulking, so you're saying bureaucratic system. Someone isn't responsible for it, then the patient doesn't even own it, because the patient largely gets infantilized. So they're in the home setting and they're saying, hey, it's impressive to me sometimes. I'm looking at these 6 or 7 medications I have to take, and I just go through my routine and do I even own what's going into me? Obviously, that's the best case of it. So and then I almost feel like because no one's dominated in that adherence industry, and we hope you do, it's almost like that someone getting a seat at the table around those stakeholders.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you've said. I think the thing that's underlying that is if you look at the US healthcare system, it's incredibly fragmented, more so than probably any other system in the world. The reason behind that is for profit. So at every single stage, you've got a lot of different stakeholders, everybody who's making margin on that. They're not the incentives to work together. The one major kind of, exclusion to that is maybe Kaiser Permanente out in California, because it's a closed system, so they can control and monitor everything, a bit like the European healthcare systems as well. But I do think that you're not going to see significant change to that. There's too much vested interest. But I do think this is where tech, whether it's adherence or any other aspect, if it's applied appropriately, can make huge efficiency gains and raise the standard of care for patients as well.
Yeah, the economics are clear.
Let me double click on it, because I think we've always looked at tech, right? And if you look at digital health and some successes and mostly failures through the last decade and a half, I think we're so over-indexed on tech. So let's just take the medication adherence as an example. Great, I may have my 7 pill boxes with apps from AdhereTech, right? Now, I'm sure you guys have studied, and I'm curious, what are the reasons that people actually don't take their drug? Some of them could be some kind of adverse events, I don't know, gut health issues, other things, the stressors in life, right? Oh shit, I forgot because I had to drop off my daughter somewhere. So I'm curious, what's the mix? Because again, technology is only good so far, right?
Yep.
And real-time data back to pharma, fantastic. Maybe real-time notification to caregivers, fantastic. But you can't force someone to take their pill and shove it down their throat. They still got to take hold of themselves. Curious on.
So I think it's about giving the patient more autonomy and control over their own medication regime. In order to do that, you touched on, people are busy. Things are coming at us left and center in an increasingly accelerated fashion these days. So you've got to provide something that makes it easy for them to take control and fits within their environment, if you like. We've looked into a lot, and Jim, I'm sure you could comment as well. The main reasons that patients don't take their meds, one is just forgetfulness, get busy, whatever. It takes us 3 months, human beings, 3 months to establish a new behavior, 1 week to break it. And if you look at the gyms, the fitness centers in January, everybody signs up and they're back to normal in February, which is so it's difficult for us as human beings to establish those behaviors. So you need to help patients with that. Other main areas are side effects for particular meds. And then the other one is copay, it's the cost. So the burden of paying for these meds now, especially in the US, is being transferred more and more to patients by payers. Pharma provides copay support because they recognize that, but there are limitations there as well.
Okay. I think it's interesting, it's been studied a lot, but perceived and real efficacy. It's one of these things that medications aren't, as we learn more and more, they're not static, right? Like they change over time, the effect of change over time. I think about my own supplement, what supplements I go on, what I think about what medications are. And so if you perceive that it's not working, or you perceive it actually worked and you don't need it anymore, never mind the data. So this kind of mismatch around efficacy.
Yep, definitely. I think, no, I agree.
I'm just going to double click one more time on the whole behavior aspect of it. And I think I have a solution for it all. Medication, health coaching.
I think that's it.
That's it. And to a certain extent, it's yeah. So Marina and I, we run a health coaching company, and a lot of this stuff isn't stressors. And actually, that's the interesting part. We are actually doing around the GOP management, like prevention, lifestyle changes, step up, step down program. And one of the top things is around stressors, right? And we specifically around the adherence component, stressors and then payments that we're seeing. But yeah, look, to your point, 90 days to change their behavior, any and all human beings, right? It's very public about it. I started taking metformin 3 months ago. It took me, now it's like just triggers in the head that I got to take it twice a day. But it took me some time, and I'm pretty self-aware in a lot of this.
How you feeling?
Working with I'm feeling like $1 million. Yeah.
Should we all be on metformin? Shouldn't we all be on it? Is that what it is?
No prescriptions here. We're not doctors for our million viewers.
But I think one of the things you're doing there, Eugene, if you think, so Jim, your reference, like in the UK, you've still got because my dad needs to go and get his meds. And basically he'll talk to the local pharmacist who will spend some time with him and explain what to expect, how to take them, potential side effects. In the US, because it's profit driven, I go into my local Walgreens, take a couple of meds myself, they are backed out the door, people, and they have no time to spend with patients at all because the system is. So I think that's one of the challenges. The other thing is, once you leave the healthcare setting, whether it's a pharmacist, doctor, hospital, nobody has any idea other than the patient what's happening. And the key thing is there are patient support services, etc., who can intervene. But the importance of that is you need to intervene at the right time where it makes sense. If somebody's becoming compliant, if you do it 3 weeks later, it's pointless.
I don't want to speak on all the patient support programs, but again, when I was in pharma, the way I interpreted the relationship with corporate and patient support programs, you have to do it, and it's a cost to the business. And to me, there was so much leverage you can have on everything from data, et cetera, to actually help these patients through, and not just to have that patient support program as a checkbox. But I think because of back to the ownership issue, Jim, right, that you alluded to, it was one of those things, don't want to touch it. It's highly outsourced, adverse event reporting, everybody's scared of it because it's regulated. But I think it's so underutilized as a set of programs in an environment.
Better.
I know we've had, Otsuka still has a very good patient support program there. The people that tend to work in those programs usually have a healthcare background, so they're nurses. They are very empathetic and they are very purpose driven. However, it's still challenging because of the regulations, the structure, everything like that. And again, once the patient is on their own, when is an appropriate time to intervene so that you're not bugging the patient, but you're actually adding value? And that timeliness is something that our system can certainly help with, but it's a key gap in the system right now.
One of the things like every time we've caught up a couple of times, you said in JP Morgan, I've always been inspired by how you're cracking it. And my sense, and you can I'll read it back to you, was that you just thought there's the whole pharma, but I get what you're saying, like bringing someone with pharma contacts and going in. But my intuition is that you just thought bigger about it. And you went after bigger. That was my reaction. I remember going back and talking to our mutual friend saying, you were walking in, you're saying, hey, I'm gonna, and Eugene and I talk about this when you're building companies in centrally important spaces. But that was my reaction. But you've had a lot of success.
Yeah, I think we're building success now. I think that's one of the key challenges, right? You look at the scale of this issue and you think of the impact you can make. I think there's a quote somebody was showing me recently where they said that if you could crack medication adherence, that would solve so many issues and be much bigger impact than individual drugs coming to market. So I think the opportunity to have a massive impact on healthcare and patients in this space, it's absolutely huge. So I think that's why you've got to think big. I think then that the challenge is, how do you connect that grand vision with actually building a company and gaining traction. And it's hard yards. You know this, Jim, it's probably you as well, Eugene, given what you guys are doing. And it's just the people, for example, that in AdhereTech and have stayed with it are very purpose driven. They really want to make an impact for patients. They want to do something that has a meaningful impact with their work. And I think that you try and connect those, and then it's a question of you're trying to change the industry, and it's a big, inflexible industry. So you've got to try and find ways within which to do that.
And this is the amazing part to me, right? Most of entrepreneurs get started in healthcare because there's some kind of a personal reason. There's a drive, to your point earlier, and it's just people are passionate about helping other people. And it's one of the very few industries where you can actually see the impact, right? And then the system just starts eating you, right? And so I think it's important for all of us, the entrepreneurs, to keep pushing. I just read some LinkedIn, and then we'll get to the final question, but every health tech company, not just a product market fit, but we all need a system product fit, right? And it's either you fit into the system, whether it's reimbursements or pharma is buying AdhereTech left and right because it makes sense, or you create your own parallel system, but it's still a system. So just fascinating to think of it that way.
Yeah, I think people often think of innovation as these massive breakthroughs, but if you look at true innovation that's successful, it's incremental. If you they go back to what was the Apple that had the Sony Walkman, so you had to put the tape in. The key thing that Apple did with their, I can't even remember, iPod, was basically they put the hard disk into a device. That was not huge. That was just an incremental improvement, but they understood. So I think it's much easier to work within a system and change it from within than to try and come in and completely break down all the barriers with that system. I think if you do that, you're going to burn yourself out. I think it's very difficult to do. I think the other thing you talked about there for entrepreneurs is the resilience, the levels of resilience and self-belief. I'll be honest, my own levels, I always thought myself as a fairly resilient person, but it's certainly being tested in this role.
You can use a health coach as well, because our results show for themselves that 10.8% resilience increases after just 2 sessions. Anyway, with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jim with his last famous question.
Okay, and so we're going to head into the future. So we're 5 years off, and all the major pharmaceutical companies have set up this global adherence conference in Scotland. And the conference is called the Resilience Conference, and it's all about incremental innovation and bringing this there. And they've asked you get an email that says they've asked you to keynote the conference based on all the impact that you've had bringing your solution across the globe, not just America. So you're delighted, and you're flying over. They send you tickets, and you're coming off the plane, and you get a little text on your phone that says your mobile phone is working. You're welcome to Scotland. So you're there, and you walk in the conference. You get up, and you give this keynote talk, and you're delivering how'd you do it? How'd you take this company and drive it forward? And inspiration for the industry. It's patients crying in the audience because they're on their medications, and it's like revivalist there, and you're giving a talk, you're just feeling great about this. What a fantastic thing. And you're planning a round of golf later that weekend after the conference. Anyways, you come walking off the stage, and this young man just stares at you, and he just heads running right towards you. And he says, Innes, I have to talk to you. You don't understand. I started off I have a Swedish mother, a Scottish dad. I grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. I played soccer in Kentucky. And I'm about to start my own new AI influence adherence technology company that's taking technology to the next level. And he says, and you look at him, and as you stared at him, what was the one piece of advice you would give that younger version of yourself?
That was a long question for one might be a very short answer, Jim. But so the one piece of advice is I'd say there's going to be lots and lots of people telling you can't do it. But what they're saying is they can't do it, and they're scared to try. Don't listen to them. Believe in yourself. That's the only way that the change happens, is people who have their own idea, they believe in it, and they find a way to make it successful. And people don't want you necessarily to be successful, because then it reflects on them. They're like, could I have done it? Maybe not, but you're probably scared. So believe in yourself, take the leap, learn. What's the worst that happens? You learn going forward and you pay it forward.
Love it.
Love
And it's
it.
a pleasure meeting you. Enjoy Morristown, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and see you next week.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
man.
Be good. Cheers.